everybody, and welcome back to another series review of sorts. I might end up framing this a bit more like a discussion only because there's some things I really want to talk about involving this series. And the series in question is the Grisha Trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. So the books in this trilogy are Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and finally, Ruin and Rising. Ruin and Rising just came out a couple weeks ago, and as you can see, I have the Barnes & Noble Collector's Edition that's all pretty and gold and shiny and features an extra little prequel short story about the Darkling. This trilogy is a fantasy trilogy that takes place in a very heavily Russian-inspired fantasy realm known as Ravka, and our protagonist is a young girl by the name of Alina, and she is an orphan. Her best friend Mal is also an orphan, and the two of them are members of an army. What this army does is cross into and through what is known as the Shadowfold. The Shadowfold in this realm came across to me at least as this kind of giant tear in the fabric of reality, and basically there's absolutely no light in the Shadowfold, and the Shadowfold divides Ravka essentially in half. You have to cross the Shadowfold to get from one end of Ravka to the other, and basically it totally sucks because there are things in there which will come out and try and eat you, and you have an extremely low survival rate. The other half of this army is made up of people whom are known as Grisha. The Grisha are led by their incredibly charismatic and enigmatic leader known as the Darkling. So the Grisha are people with extra abilities. So they can manipulate elements, they can be healers, they can mess with your heart, they can be very good with metals and materials. Essentially, they all have some sort of extra little gift. They're led by the Darkling because the Darkling is unique. The Darkling has the power to summon and manipulate shadow. So if you put him in the Shadowfold, you figure you might have a higher survival rate. So basically what happens is Alina and her part of the army are sent into the Shadowfold. She sees Mal get extremely hurt and she rushes off to save him, and she discovers that she's actually what's known as a sun summoner. She can manipulate light. What follows in the rest of Shadow and Bone is essentially Alina joining the Grisha, training as a Grisha, and learning the truth about the Shadowfold and about the Darkling and everybody else, and all the other histories of Ravka. Oh, before we go any further, I should probably note there might be some spoilers in here. No, not even might, there will be spoilers. So, if you have not read this trilogy, here's the chance to back out now. Okay, bye. Okay, so let's get spoilery. So, Shadow and Bone. At the end of the day, Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising are all really slow stories. Not much actually happens in terms of a plot. Most of the time it's Alina staying put, doing something, having to do something else, then staying put and sort of planning. There's a lot of planning that goes on, but there's not necessarily a lot of action. Usually your action will not come in until the final third-ish of the book, and then it's just a sea of battles of some sort. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does make for some pretty uneven pacing, and if you're not good with extremely talky books where it's really just a lot of people sitting and talking, you're not gonna enjoy most of this trilogy. Shadow and Bone in particular is really bad about that. It gets a little better in Siege and Storm when we get the introduction of a new character of Stormhund, and he is basically a sky pirate. It's pretty awesome, and he's actually the younger prince who's rumored to be a bastard. Spoilers, it's not a rumor. And he's really fun, and there's sort of a quest more in the middle of the book, then there's more planning, and then there's a lot more talking and sitting around and not doing too much, and then a big battle at the end. To Ruin and Rising's credit, action is happening for pretty much almost all of the book. There is, again, a portion where we're just sort of sitting talking, but it's much briefer than any of the other novels. I have to give Ruin and Rising a lot of credit in terms of pacing. It was a much more evenly paced novel. Things pretty much moved the whole way through, if not necessarily at a breakneck speed pace, which I have found with YA fantasy sometimes to be the case. Sometimes they move way too quickly, and I give Leigh Bardugo a lot of credit in that she clearly kind of wants to spend time in this world. I just feel like the pacing could have been a little better overall in terms of the trilogy as a whole. So let's talk about characters. Alina as a character, I actually like because she felt very, very normal. Yes, she's the sun summoner, but she didn't feel like a trope. I look at things like Divergent. It's gonna be my big one I'm gonna harp on, because Triss had no training in any of the things that she did in Dauntless, and then all of a sudden she's a master at all these things in Dauntless, and that drove me a little bonkers, because I said, really? She's just suddenly really good at everything? I mean, really? When Alina discovers that she's the Sun Summoner, we establish that she's had this power her whole life, but she actually physically and knowingly repressed it as a young child. And so this power that she has never developed beyond inability to control it in any way. And it takes her 3 books to even get anywhere close to doing some of the really cool stuff that she pulls off in Ruin and Rising. I really appreciate that she's constantly working at this, and she's constantly sitting there going, I don't think I can do this. I don't know how to do this. I don't even completely understand this power that I have. And that there's always consequences to what she does. I mean, when she and Mal escape at the end of Shadow and Bone, the consequence is that she now has an extremely powerful and extremely dangerous enemy chasing after her. At the end of Siege and Storm, the consequence she suffers is that she's almost completely drained of her power and is physically weakened to a very dangerous level. And we also find out that another consequence of that in Ruin and Rising is that part of her power has been transferred to the primary antagonist. And by the end of this book, she completely loses her power because she has to give it up in a way that is a difficult decision for her, because she freely admits that she likes the power and she likes having power. Let's be honest, who doesn't really in a way? I mentioned the antagonist. The primary antagonist is the Darkling. He comes in initially as a kind of Rochester to Alina's Jane Eyre. It's very similar in a kind of perverted teacher-student relationship. In this case, it's perverse because the Darkling is in fact our villain. And I'll be honest, going into this book, I didn't know anything about it other than that it was Russian-inspired and fantasy. And the moment I hear Shadowfold and somebody named the Darkling, I'm going to assume he's the villain. And he comes in and he's wildly charismatic, he is considered good looking, and I'm just thinking to myself, he's our bad guy. I'm sorry, he's gonna be our bad guy. There's no choice. So I was not too surprised at the end of Shadow and Bone when he turned out to be the primary antagonist of the series. And I went, kind of not shocked. Shadowfold, Darkling, which means little dark. He does make for a very good villain in that he is wildly charismatic and he's very manipulative. And you find it's because he's like a couple 100 years old. He's had some time to work at this, and he's very good at what he does. What I also found interesting is that there is pretty much nothing redemptive about him at all. He's not only just Machiavellian, he's cold-hearted to the point of being seemingly heartless. He is willing to do anything for pretty much absolute power. He's cold on a level that's pretty scary. This is predominantly in Ruin and Rising, but Alina does tend to talk about him at times by saying he's like a little boy who is graced with too big a destiny and too much power. And I go, yes, I can see that. But you can also look at Sturmhund, whose true name is Nikolai, and Nikolai is also a boy who has a great thirst for power and has a great responsibility and a fairly large destiny in a way on his shoulders, and he is the counterpoint to the Darkling, in a way, more so than Mal is. Mal obviously becomes the primary love interest for Alina, and I like that they were friends first, and they have their issues with their relationship. Here's where we get into the discussion point. The Darkling and Alina as a ship. I never shipped them. The whole series. I didn't ship them at all. And I understand that's considered one of the primary ships among the fan base, because the Darkling is wildly popular. Kind of like another villain whom I know who's wildly charismatic, dark-haired, and has a huge fan base. Alina and the Darkling's pairing doesn't work for me because the Darkling has no redemptive qualities, because there's really almost nothing good about him. We're never shown anything about him, honestly, that makes me go, maybe he's a good guy under there. No, he's pretty much a dick all the way through. Even when he's being charming and charismatic to Alina, you know his end game is just basically to mess with her and to achieve absolute power. He would brutalize, manipulate, and yeah, he's just not good. He's not a good person. And so I never shipped him with Alina because despite all of her flaws, and she has a lot of them, she's a good person. She actually genuinely wants to help. Oh, and fun fact, the Shadowfold was the Darkling's fault. And he doesn't want to fix it, he wants to make it worse. I'm like, why do we like this guy? Is it because he's charismatic? And this boils me down to the point that I never liked the Darkling because he reminded me a little too much of a very, very famous historical figure. Yeah, I'm bringing Hitler into this because Hitler, when we look at him with the 2020 of hindsight, we as a modern generation go, how could anybody have followed this guy? He's a monster. Well, to the German people, he was powerful and wildly charismatic. And that's what the Darkling is. He's very powerful and he's wildly charismatic, but he is also an awful person. And I could not in any way ship him with Alina or even understand that ship because I looked at the Darkling and I'm like, he's basically Hitler. Or any other wildly charismatic leader who's really good at putting on a front, gathering followers and giving speeches, but turning around and doing some of the most brutal and horrific of things in the name of power. Here endeth the lesson. Okay, so that little almost rant discussion thing aside, the Darkling did make for a good villain, and as an obstacle to Alina, he was certainly formidable, and I enjoyed watching their little battles. The other characters in this are fun. I've noted before Sturmhound, or Nikolai, who's our Sky Pirate Prince. He's very fun, and I really love the dark turn that his character took in Ruin and Rising. Not dark in the sense that he went particularly dark, or, he had some weird dark backstory, but in that the Darkling changed him into something not entirely human, and I was just sitting there reading that part going, what just happened? It was really phenomenal. I really liked that Leigh Bardugo went that dark. I didn't think she would, and I was going, no way, no way. Intense. As for the ending, it's a very bittersweet ending, and I think it's appropriate. It reminds me of the ending of Lord of the Rings, which is an extremely bittersweet ending, in that Frodo returns to the Shire but goes, I'm forever changed by this. I have scars, I'm haunted. There's too much that happened. And I think Alina and Mal, in their survival at the end of the series, and the stripping of their power that they have, realize that they're forever changed by what happened, and that, yeah, we accomplished what we wanted. We defeated the bad guy, we destroyed the Shadowfold, we achieved peace of sorts, and we put a good ruler on the throne. We're still going to be haunted by this. War has changed us, and it was war. As much as I think a lot of people might have been unsatisfied by that ending, that was more realistic than anything else. Overall, despite some of the bumps in terms of pacing, and maybe in some of the character and plot tropes, I really enjoyed the Grisha Trilogy. I thought there was a brutality to some of it that I had not anticipated and thoroughly enjoyed, and I'm very excited for the next set of novels that Ms. Bardugo is going to be writing that are set in Ravka, or at least in the same universe as Ravka. That's all for me tonight, you guys, and so until next time, cheers.